Welcome to the Roots of the LMHE podcast. We are here to amplify the voices of Louisiana's music community and cultural leaders while exploring how heritage, creativity, and economic equity intersect. I'm your host, George Geekus. We are here with Ben Sandmel, musician, drummer, author, producer, and folklorist. Glad to have you here today, sir.
Well, thank you for having me.
Fantastic hat and jacket.
Glad to be here too.
Yes.
Thank you.
So can we please start a little bit about yourself and how you got into music in general and
well, I
where
could
you
go
are as a
back,
part
I
of
could
this
go
project?
back to childhood, or I just go back to Louisiana.
We can go back as far as you want. Yeah, from childhood to Louisiana,
Well,
all of it.
The first music I listened to was classical music. And then around that same age, I started listening to AM radio. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and they had, this is a very dated term, they had what they called the Nifty 50. That was the charts. And so I started listening to that. I was immediately drawn to rhythm and blues. I remember one song was On Broadway by the Drifters, just off the top of my head.
Great song.
And then the Beatles came in and blew me away. Went to see them when I was 12 and started getting into all the British invasion music, the Beatles, the Stones, the Yardbirds especially, and played some as a teenager, but not really seriously. When I moved to Chicago, well, I'll back up a minute. I started playing in Cincinnati with an old boogie woogie piano player named Big Joe Duskin, who was really, really good. He played other people's songs, but he played them perfectly. And I produced his first album. I was 24. I had no idea what I was doing at all, but it came out on our Hooley Records. I moved to Chicago in 1976, and I started playing with a lot of the old Chicago blues people whose names I'd seen on record covers since I was 14. I couldn't believe I was playing with them, and I couldn't believe they weren't filling concert halls. They were playing little bars. I started playing with an old piano player named Sunnyland Slim. His best historical footnote, I guess, is that he got Muddy Waters his first record deal. He took Muddy Waters to Chess Records. I played with him. I played with a guy named Jimmy Johnson. Occasionally, I played with Junior Wells. I was a young drummer, green, inconsistent, some nights good, some nights not so much. And if it got to be 8:30 or so and the drummer hadn't showed up, then they start to freak out and they call the other veteran drummers. And if they're not available, they start calling the eager young guys. And this is before cell phones. I would sit by the phone hoping that a drummer didn't show up. And sometimes it happened. And I lived in Chicago until 1982. I had come to New Orleans for Jazz Fest several times in the late 70s. Before that, I used to work as a deckhand on the river, and we came down to New Orleans, and I had time off in New Orleans. So those two things inspired me to move here. I moved here in Christmas of 82. In the spring of 83, I started working for Jazz Fest.
Wow.
Which I've been doing ever since. I started out writing press releases, and that evolved into being a programming consultant for Cajun music and Zydeco, blues, and country. And I still do that. And I'm also the producer of the Music Heritage Stage, which is the festival's oral history / interview venue up in the Grandstand building.
Let's talk a little bit about your jobs within the Jazz Fest organization and how you got those, because they didn't just appear out of nowhere. You know, you came to a point where you go from having an idea to eventually now you see it every single time you have the event each year.
Right. Well, I have a friend from Chicago, and he was dating a woman who worked at Jazz Fest, who was not exactly sure what her title was, but she was involved in promotion and marketing. So I went to see her, and they needed someone to write press releases. So I started doing that. And then the following year, Quint Davis and the people who produced the festival were also producing the Cool Jazz Festival, which was held in City Park. And Chuck Berry was on the show, Count Basie, people such as that. And we all were working in the same hotel room for some reason. I have a friend named Bob Margolin who played with Muddy Waters for years. And someone said, well, you have a call from Bob Margolin. And Quint heard that. And Quint had hired Muddy Waters for years to play Jazz Fest. So the fact that I knew Bob Margolin kind of put me on his radar. I started working as a programming consultant. In addition, I had been writing about music since around 1976 professionally. And when I moved here, I saw a magazine at the K&B, which doesn't exist anymore, and called Louisiana Life. And it had a music column, and I read it. And I thought, well, I'm qualified to do this too. So I went to see them. They assigned me a feature story on Clifton Chenier. They had no idea how to get a hold of him. I went to Lafayette. I had a number for him, but he had no secretary, no office, no answering machine. He pretty much had a series of payphones he would stop at to do business. So I thought I had an appointment with him on a Monday, but he wouldn't let me in his house until Friday. I went every day. And because of that, Quint realized that in addition to some knowledge of the blues world, that I was also had a knowledge of Cajun music and Zydeco. And that sort of morphed into country, especially because in 1987, I started playing drums with and managing a band called the Hackberry Ramblers, which was a Cajun / Western swing band, some material in French, some material in English. They had formed the band in 1933, and they still had the two original founding members.
Incredible.
And because part of their music was rooted in country, especially Bob Wills type of material, I somehow morphed into also being the consultant on country. And then in 1996, I think, the woman who was the producer of the Music Heritage Stage passed away, and they asked me to take over that job, which I've had ever since. Well, since then, I guess the most notable thing is I wrote a book about Ernie Cato.
Okay.
It's entitled Ernie Cato, the R&B Emperor of New Orleans. It was published in 2012 by the Historic New Orleans Collection. They did a beautiful job on it with a big book, beautiful color photos, high quality paper, the kind of books that aren't published so much anymore. So I was very lucky to have that experience. I actually met them because I'm on their softball team. And
City keeps getting smaller and smaller, right?
It is. And by now I've written the liner notes to over 150 records, albums. When I started out, there were records.
And yeah, now.
And I got a master's degree in musicology from Tulane University. I graduated in 2021, and I wrote my thesis about the Hackberry Ramblers, using their recordings sort of as a portal into the history of the band. So the title was From 78s to Compact Discs, the recordings of the Hackberry Ramblers, 1935 through 2004.
You seem to have a wealth of knowledge and experience, but is there one moment, event, or anything that made you realize how special the New Orleans music community is?
Yes, there is. Okay. There used to be a great AM radio station here called WYAT. It stood for
WYAT.
WYAT, and it stood for Where You At. And they played all kinds of New Orleans and rhythm and blues. I sort of thought I knew something about it. I didn't know anything. They started playing all these songs that blew me away, such as The Monkey Speaks His Mind by Dave Bartholomew and Ain't Got No Home by Frogman Henry. And they would play 4 or 5 songs like that with no academic commentary. And then to them, it was all the same thing. In the middle of that, they'd play The Ladies of Calcutta by Lawrence Welk. And I thought it was great. And one day I was stopped at the light at Rampart and Canal, and the Fats Domino song, The Fat Man, came on, and he was singing, I was standing on the corner of Rampart and Canal. And I thought, well, this is a moment.
Right.
So that was a big one. Yeah, that was kind of a cosmic moment.
I love that. And why do you think it's important to preserve and share the stories behind Louisiana's musical heritage?
Well, Louisiana has a very rich and diverse musical heritage. All the genres that evolved here, jazz, Cajun music, Zydeco, swamp pop, huge contributions to rhythm and blues from the late 40s up through today. It's always evolving, it's always changing. Huge talents such as Alan Toussaint and Dr. John, Irma Thomas, many, many, many others, Ernie Cato. And there's, did you say New Orleans or all of Louisiana?
Louisiana in general, but you're just in
Louisiana. Yeah, well, okay. There's
your knowledge doesn't just go to
right. Well,
New
there's
Orleans.
so
It's
much
beyond
music.
that. Yeah.
There's so much music in Louisiana. It's just one of the great musical areas of the world. I don't like to go into superlatives and say, it's the only one or the best one, but huge contributions to American music. Traditional jazz, New Orleans rhythm and blues, soul, swamp pop, country, Cajun music, and Zydeco. You go to North Louisiana, rockabilly with Jerry Lee Lewis, gospel, small ethnic enclaves like the Isleños from St. Bernard Parish, who had a repertoire of medieval songs sung in Spanish up through the 1980s. It's pretty much gone now after Hurricane Katrina. But just so many different types of music, and then they're always interacting, and there are hybrids and cross-pollination. So it's a very musically rich area. I would say compared to where I grew up in Cincinnati, there was a lot of blues and rhythm and blues and country. There was a very important record label called King Records, and James Brown recorded for them, and then big bluegrass bands such as the Stanley Brothers. But Cincinnati did not have the breadth of material that New Orleans does.
Now, you said you grew up in Cincinnati and you've also lived in the state for a long time. What do you think people outside Louisiana misunderstand or appreciate about our culture?
There's a common misconception. This is just not in any particular order.
It's okay.
There's a common misconception that New Orleans is an important city in Cajun and Zydeco culture, and it's not. That's more to the west in Lafayette, where there's still
Acadia,
where there's still a French-speaking population. Not many people still only speak French, but the French people who came to New Orleans came at a different time from different areas. So there's a common misconception that Cajun music equates with New Orleans. There's so many big artists out of New Orleans. I'm not sure that people realize, for example, that Fats Domino built his career in New Orleans and sang in a very thick New Orleans accent. I'm trying to think of misconceptions. Well, people come down here and they want to see Spanish moss and alligators, all the stereotypical tourist things. And for the Cajun part of the state, they think it's all swamps. Not a lot of people live in the swamps, not all that much music there. And it's flat farmland where they grow soybeans and sugarcane. It's known as the prairies. So those are among the misconceptions. And also from the success of the TV series Treme, I think people have the misconception that you can't walk out on the street for 5 minutes without seeing a second line parade or Mardi Gras Indians. And they don't realize that, there's 99.9% of the people are living a life not active in music and
Very
not
true.
always encountering music all the time.
It's not that dramatized.
It's a nice stereotype. I mean, it's a play. I thought Treme depicted New Orleans in a good light and
I agree.
Was accurate. I don't think Treme tried to create a false impression, at all. But I think people watched it in Cincinnati and thought, well, every day is a parade.
Every day is Mardi Gras.
Yeah, every day is a Mardi Gras Indian tribe.
Even if you happen to live by where a route is where they're going.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, no, I have to agree with you on that. There are some gaps, I would say, in how our cultural history is documented and presented versus how it is actually happening.
Right.
And one of those is, like you said, through Treme. Nothing against David Simon. He actually shining a light on something people probably had no idea about without actually coming down here to visiting for themselves.
And they also had a reputation for treating people very well and respecting the musicians, which doesn't always happen. Yeah.
In terms of respecting musicians, part of the mission of the LMHE is to respect and honor the evolving music culture by preserving our legacy, educating within our story, and inspiring the future. This was with the intention to utilize our programs and profits for the end goal of equitably supporting musicians and gig workers. And how do you think we can go about that, specifically with gig pay? You've seen it through Jazz Fest, and obviously you're going to these places where you've been dealing with blues musicians and you've seen it from all facets, whether it's from the top until or something much smaller than that.
Sure. Well, as a musician, as a working musician, I'm always in favor of seeing musicians get paid well, getting paid equitably. Mm-hmm. The sad fact of the music business, which hopefully this project will help dilute and raise the standards, but the sad fact of the music business is that musicians are on the bottom rung when it comes to pay. Yeah, the record companies, the lawyers,
everybody
the managers,
else.
everybody
else. And
they make better money.
Yeah.
So I'm very much in favor of musicians getting a fair pay for a fair day's or night's work, and the gig workers too. These big events could not function without the gig workers. They just absolutely wouldn't. And not just the musicians, but the engineers, the roadies, if they have them, everybody. So I'm very much in favor. I'm very pro-musician, and I'm very much in favor of anything that's going to bring the pay up to where musicians can actually make a comfortable living playing music. Not have to have, 2 or 3 other things going on the side.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
In what ways do you think that the LMHE could help change how artists are valued and compensated?
I think, well, I'm not sure if they would put the word out that musicians are getting paid more than usual, but it will certainly get out.
It will come out at some point without plastering it.
It will come out. No, it'll come out on the grapevine because everybody talks about, oh, this band leader doesn't pay well. This club doesn't pay well. I did the gig and never got paid. Mm-hmm. And, people talk about exposure. Well, people die from exposure.
That's a great, we're going to have to keep that one right there.
I didn't make it up.
It's still.
Yeah, so
we'll pay you an exposure.
There are certain instances where exposure can be good for you.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
If you open for a big act and the audience likes you, there are definitely, I have done things for very low pay because I thought the exposure seemed worthwhile and it was genuine. But often it's just a ploy to get people to work for cheap or nothing.
Very true.
So I think this organization, which has huge ambitious plans and connections and is getting the funding, that could really, really help with that, And of course, the word will get out in the music community as it always does. And it's kind of a cyclical thing. It will feed itself.
Now, you've had the opportunity to see musicians. Jazz Fest it's a season. You see lots of people come in for the season, and then a lot of these musicians then leave. And they'll go to Europe. They'll do like the summer tour, the circuit.
Right.
Do you think the LMHE would allow to have year-round opportunities for musicians? And what would that mean for musicians in New Orleans? Because it seems for a lot of people that's not an option right now.
If they have the budget and the facility to hire musicians year-round, that would be wonderful. That would be great. And there's always a tourism market here.
Mm-hmm.
Might get a little slow in the summer.
That's to be expected.
Might be down now because of the current administration, but it'll come back up. So yeah, anything that is going to get musicians work and is going to be done right and promoted properly, I'm absolutely in favor of it. And an impressive big facility like that with exhibits and a lot of knowledgeable people involved, it would be great. I would love to see that happen.
What excites you most about the LMHE as a platform to advocate for economic fairness in the music industry?
That would be great. We need economic fairness. It's very important. And the musicians often get the short end of the stick compared to other people in the music business and compared to the general public. People think, well, if you go to a job where you're playing, you're not really working.
Yeah.
So yeah, anything that is really going to get the word out and induce proper respect for musicians and make people realize that it's not just the 3 hours on the gig, it's the rehearsal, it's the equipment, it's all the logistics of getting to and from the gig. It's not just a 3-hour job on a Saturday night. It's much more than that. It's a whole lifestyle.
It's a craft.
And it can be a very arduous lifestyle, very challenging. And for some people, quite a few people, it means scraping by. And the internet has exacerbated that with different entities that don't pay well. And so, yeah, anything that is going to raise the bar for how musicians are paid and how they are respected as professionals, people who have chosen a professional career path that is just as respectable and substantial as, say, a lawyer, a teacher. Everyone has their training. Everyone starts out and learns and then attains a certain level of professionalism. And I don't think the public always realizes that. They just see somebody up on stage looking like they're having fun and thinking, well, they just knock off and all the bills for the week are covered.
Yeah, I'd like to discuss that in further depth. Do you think that's because obviously now you're talking about some of the way the between the streaming and just the way that music is consumed, it's not as revered, but you also point up the point that you just see somebody on stage and you think that they're having fun, not realizing that it is a craft. It is a lifelong pursuit.
Yes.
How can we focus without just ramming it down people's throats?
Which they will resist.
Yeah, of course. How can we get to a point where a light bulb will go off and they'll understand, oh, this is worthy enough to be viewed as a serious profession and it needs to be treated as such. And it's not just background music, right, or it's not just entertainment, that it's art and it's important.
Right. Well, maybe one way to do that would be to create documentaries, and they wouldn't have to be hours long, but just show a typical working week for a musician, Monday through Sunday, what they do, everything they have to do that leads to a couple of hours on stage, the travel, the expense, maintaining your equipment, everything.
It's outside of the life issues that always come up in just the day-to-day existence. Yeah.
Right. So people don't realize, and there's not necessarily any reason why they would realize what all is entailed in being a musician. And I think if they saw that, all the things that musicians have to do while the bills pile up, come in every day and pile up, they might understand that it's not frivolous, that it's not something people just do for fun because they're too lazy to get a real job. That is often the perception, not always, but people don't understand it. And there are other professions, school teachers.
I agree. Yeah, same category.
Don't get paid particularly well. There are these inexplainable, arbitrary degrees of compensation for people who put in the same amount of hard work. And yet musicians don't get paid well. School teachers don't get paid well. Corporate lawyers get paid very well. Not that they don't deserve it. They work hard too. But it's just a leveling of the playing field and recognizing that musicians qualify for that too. And if people stop to think of how much music enriches their lives, either listening to it on the radio or going to performances, I mean, everybody's day is touched in some way by music.
From your perspective, how could the LMHE change the economic future of the city?
It should be, I think the museum will be a huge draw for people from around the world. There's no museum like that in New Orleans. It's on a large scale. It's going to be in an impressive building. It's going to draw on nationally respected authorities to create it, both in terms of the music displays and the programming, and then architecture and interaction with the service industry. So anything that generates a lot of business and draws a lot of people bodes very well. And I'm hoping to see people plug into it and really prosper.
Do you think it create a lot of jobs directly and indirectly?
I would think it does. Yeah. I don't know the details, but yeah, if you have a 120,000 square foot museum, you're going to have to hire a lot of people in different capacities to keep it going. And then you're going to hire musicians. So yeah, it could be a real economic engine.
And having a permanent cultural institution would be fantastic for us as well.
It absolutely would. Absolutely. And a large museum, a world-class museum, along with the National Museum of African American Music in Nashville, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Stax Museum, the Country Music Hall of Fame. There's the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix. There are regional museums, maybe smaller markets that focus on a particular genre of music. So anything on a big level, especially, and New Orleans is already a big tourism destination. So this will be a year-round attraction. Jazz Fest has a season, Mardi Gras has a season, Fall Festival season is a season. But a year-round facility promoting this and focusing on it and paying people appropriately, that could be huge, yes.
And what kind of cultural future do you hope that the LMHE can help create?
Cultural features. Well, of course, live music, hiring local and regional musicians to perform, exhibits curated by professional, knowledgeable people with different music artifacts, maybe, what do you call it? An audio thing when you walk through, there's got to be I'm butchering the name.
Yeah, I know. I don't know what the official name is.
Right.
But
well, okay.
When you walk through, when you have like a guided tour.
Let's just say this. Exhibits throughout the museum that are well curated by knowledgeable people in different genres. And they show the instruments, they show artifacts, posters, stage clothes, and there will also be an audio and maybe an audio visual component which enhances that. So it'll be a multimedia presentation.
Very hands-on.
Very hands-on. Well, not necessarily. I mean, you might have a hands-on situation where you're encouraged to press this and press that. It might be a repeating loop as people come. But the point is to feature all aspects of it and all forms of media and all approaches, not just necessarily a static museum where you look at a display case and that's all. And with all the technology of the past 30, 40 years, which is continually evolving, that will be the quality of those presentations will increase.
Yeah,
significantly.
It will just be easier for future generations to engage.
Yes, and not feel like they're being lectured. I have a friend, a dear friend, a folklorist in Lafayette named Barry Ancelet, and he likes to use the phrase guerrilla academics, Guerilla, where you impart knowledge to people, but you don't tell them that you're doing that because they're going to resist. They're going to resist. They don't want to be lectured to. They find it boring. But if you can impart knowledge in
an incognito fashion to them. And
in a what?
Incognito fashion.
Well, just, in a way that's not overbearing.
Yeah.
Like a school teacher lecturing a class. And I try and do that in the interviews at the music heritage stage. For example, if I'm interviewing a musician and they say, well, when I was on the road with Bob, and then I'll very briefly just interject, well, by Bob, he means Bob so-and-so, maybe give a sentence or two of background so that the audience has the context and they don't feel like people are being condescending or hipper than thou to talk about people that they may well never have heard of, especially if they're people from a long time ago. So the idea of giving people an experience from which they learn something, but not beating them over the head with it.
I love that.
Yeah.
Why do you think now is the right time for Louisiana to have a world-class museum?
Well, it has been time for a long time. It's an idea whose time has come. There have been different attempts at it, I think. And this one is very ambitious and seems to have the appropriate funding and the connection and the interaction with government, et cetera, et cetera. So I would love to see this be done on a big scale and to be very, very successful.
In one sentence, what impact do you believe the LMHE will have on the future of Louisiana culture?
It will preserve and document the culture, which is important. It will expose fresh audiences, new audiences who may not have any background or context to learn about the music, encourage them to get into it further, buy albums, buy books, go to live performances. It's going to spread the word, and it's going to spread the word in a very egalitarian way, where if you're not in the music business at all and you come in, you're going to have a pleasant experience and you're going to feel like you learned something. It's going to make you want to dig deeper. So it could be, it has potential to have really profound effects.
Now, a lot of the LMHE funding is proposed to come from government sources. What would you say to our governmental leaders as to why the LMHE is worth the investment and important?
Well, I think it's important. I think it's very obvious why it's important, because when you fund the arts, you're not just supporting the artists, you're encouraging tourism, you're encouraging investment. For example, there's a city in southwest Louisiana, Eunice. It's northwest of Lafayette. And in the 80s, the oil boom subsided, and they were casting around for something to jumpstart the economy. And there's an old theater in downtown Eunice, and the National Park Service started presenting weekly shows on Saturday afternoons with the MC speaking in French. He would explain things in English too, but primarily in French. And there would be 2 or 3 bands play. There would be a comedian. There would be somebody discussing recipes. It was about a 2-hour show. I played there many, many times with the Hackberry Ramblers. And that helped stimulate the economy of Eunice by creating a market for tourism, or I should say, creating opportunities for tourism. And the mayor of Eunice at that time, Curtis Jobert, was very enthusiastic about it, very, very helpful. Anything you needed. I've done a lot of work for the state folklife program, and several years in a row, the festival was in Eunice, and working with the city government of Eunice was a breeze, and other places, not so much. So anything that's, I think there's a mindset among some people that if you fund an artist or you fund a musician, you're just helping out one person. And perhaps you don't think that person deserves it, or you don't think their work is worthy. But if you didn't have artists, you wouldn't have art museums, and art museums draw people. If you didn't have musicians, you wouldn't have big music festivals like Jazz Fest. Mm-hmm. So I think if people take a big picture perspective, they're going to realize that money's going to come back in much more so than what was initially invested. That's my opinion. Well, how I first got interested in Cajun music in Zydeco, when I was a teenager, I lived in London for 2 years.
Get out.
And there was much more recognition of Cajun music in Zydeco and blues than there was, for example, in Cincinnati. So I saw Clifton Chenier play at the Royal Albert Hall in 1969, saw Magic Sam, and there were weekly programs of blues, but they also incorporated Cajun music. And actually, here's something that I think is significant. There was an album, it was an anthology called From the Bayou, and it was a different Cajun artists. And some of the songs were not the usual waltz and two-step that you might expect. They were more like blues. And there was a song called Sugar Bee, which was a big, big hit. I didn't realize it was a big hit. You know, I was 17. I thought, well, this is some exotic, esoteric culture from some remote corner of the world. And then in 1976, I was in this little bar called Ethel and Slim's Roundhouse. It was in Paradis, Louisiana, Paradis.
What parish is that in?
Say it again?
Paradis?
Paradis, Louisiana. I assume that's how they pronounce it, maybe not. And I was in this bar shooting pool, and someone got up and put money in the jukebox, and they played Sugar Bee, and people got up and started dancing. So this was a huge revelation to me that this was not some music nerd, record collector genre exclusively, but it's a living tradition, and people who may not know or may not care anything about the history, they gravitate towards it on a gut level. So they get up and they dance. And it's Cajun music and Zydeco are dance music. Different bands, including mine, if you play a concert in a hall and people are just sitting there, you have no idea if you're getting through to them. Mm-hmm. You don't know if they're enjoying it or they're bored. A band that plays for dances, you can read the crowd. You can see what they're responding to. Should we play a slow one? Should we play Johnny Be Good? Should we play a Cajun waltz? Play some swamp pop, some country. So the revelation or the realization that this music is not some obscure thing that might best belong in a glass case in a museum is a really living, happening thing. And it still is. It's changed. I mean, that was in the 70s, but it's changed. And the music is still very popular. And it's now, well, the town of Lafayette has also realized that it's a draw for tourism and an economic engine. So the music scene there is exploding. They're really talented people, say from their mid-40s to their late 20s. They might be playing in 6 or 7 different bands, playing entirely different kinds of music. And everything evolves, but the traditions remain really rich. And the way I ended up playing with the Hackberry Ramblers, I had seen them at the World's Fair in 1984. I reviewed the show. It wasn't their show. I reviewed a a day of music at the Folklife Pavilion at the World's Fair for the Times-Picayune. And so these guys came on stage, and their style was obviously pretty archaic from the past, but they were jumping up and down like teenagers. It kind of blew me away. And I had no idea I would be playing with them. No idea at all. And I got contact info for the band because at that point I became a consultant for Jazz Fest. And for years, I had the wrong guy's number and I couldn't get through to anybody. But I produced the music for the State Folklife Festival in '87 in Baton Rouge, and I hired them, and they showed up without a drummer. And I asked them if it would be cool to sit in, and they said, sure. And from the first song, we clicked like we'd been playing together for years. And that was because playing with blues artists such as Sonny Lee and Slim, I learned how to play behind the beat, not dead on the beat. And that makes it more sensual and more danceable. And let me think. In the latter, well...
Not bad for a kid from Cincinnati, huh?
Not bad for... Cincinnati have you ever heard of Lonnie Mack?
I'm well aware of Ohio's musical offerings in Cincinnati. So, but yeah.
I'm not sure how much is still happening in Cincinnati, but when I was a teenager, are you familiar with the name Lonnie Mack?
Of course, yeah.
Well, not everyone is. But he was the local hero. And then, later he came to be revered by many, many younger guitar players. But with the Hackberry Ramblers, we had an album come out in '93 and then one in '97. The album that came out in '97, I tried to get a deal. I got a few offers that were terrible. And I thought, well, these guys are not getting older. These guys were a lot older than me. One of them was 40 years older than me. And I thought, well, this isn't going to be happening forever. So I started my own label, and the album got nominated. The album got nominated for a Grammy, which blew me away. And then we would play at the Mermaid Lounge.
Okay.
For a very young audience, a lot of piercings and a lot of tattoos, dyed green hair, that kind of thing. And when I brought the guys there first, these are guys from small towns, semi-rural small towns. This is not in their experience or their frame of reference. And so we got there, they were a little apprehensive, but then we started playing and all these people were dancing like crazy. And so a lot of this music from years and years ago still has a following because it's great music, it's vital music, it makes you dance, and you may appreciate the history and you may know who played on what record in 1938, or maybe you couldn't care less and you just want to dance. But there's that ongoing appeal of Louisiana music and the fact that Armstrong is still revered today and people are interpreting his work, such as John Batiste, among others, and that Swamp Pop pioneers, there are very few of them left, but until recently, you could see Warren Storm and, I'm blanking on his name. You could see Warren Storm and Tommy McLean, and they would play here again to an audience that was not familiar with them, and people would love it. And so I just think there's an ongoing sort of timeless appeal to Louisiana music. And are you familiar with the name Amédée Ardouin?
I'm not.
Okay. A Black accordionist, African-American accordionist, some people might say Creole, I don't know. People have different terminology, and some people get upset if other terminology is applied. So I'm not trying to denigrate or insult anybody. But he started recording in the 20s, late 20s into his early 30s. And I keep one of his CDs in my car, and it's timeless. It's just got a great groove. I could give you a name of a song if you want to write it down, look it up on YouTube.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. It's called A Blues to Basile. Basile's a town. B-A-S-I-L-E by Amédée Ardouin and Dennis McGee.
Basile.
Basile, that's a little town west of Eunice.
Not in France.
No, not in
no,
France. Is there a Basile? Well, I imagine there is.
Yes.
Yeah, that would make sense. So check that out sometime.
I'm adding it to the list right now.
It'll just grip you. And what else? Many Louisiana styles, things happen in cycles, things go out of vogue, but then they're reinvented and reinterpreted, sometimes updated, but in a way that respects the past, but isn't stuck in it, reinvents it and reinterprets it. And that keeps the traditions going in a living way. Music is an organic, living entity. You can't separate it into neat categories unless you have a record store and you need which bin will be best. You need to know which bin will be best for this album or that album. But in general, the idea of classifying music, it's useful as a frame of reference, but it doesn't go that far.
One question related to that, to finish it off, do you think that the younger generation you're seeing out in these parishes where this music is being played and it's being honored and revered, are they understanding of the cultural significance of what they're playing, or are they just doing their own thing and not even thinking about it?
Many of them are very conscious of it,
Okay.
and many of them speak fluent French. Many of them comb historical archives for older songs. In 1934, the folklorist John and Alan Lomax were working for the Library of Congress, and they came to Louisiana and they recorded, 100, 150 songs, and no one had heard the recordings until the 80s. And when they did, they were blown away by the breadth of music and their traditions. And so there's a great album that came out in 2014, a 4 CD cassette of modern interpretations of songs from the Lomax sessions. So many of them, and many of them work in other ways. They're DJs, they have deep family roots in Cajun music. So many of them do it. And some of them probably show up, a gig is a gig is a gig, but both. And Lafayette is maybe atypical because there's a high level of
it's a cultural center point.
A cultural center point.
Yeah.
But again, in Lafayette, just like the show with Treme, you might go out to Lafayette and meet many, many, many people who don't know about Cajun music.
Of course.
Don't know about Zydeco.
Of course.
Aren't interested. And then, of course, there's the legacy of that music and those ethnicities being looked down on, and French being banned in the public schools. And there aren't many, I don't think there are many ugly attitudes just like there used to be. But I have friends who grew up in the 50s in neighborhoods, and they were very much discriminated against for speaking French and of having a French heritage, Cajun or Creole, as opposed to being homogenized, assimilated Americans. Yes. And, well, also, another thing I think is very significant, the movie The Big Easy in 1987, kind of a forgettable detective story on its own.
Okay.
But the soundtrack, thanks to a guy named Dickie Landry, was all Louisiana music. And it really put Louisiana music in the global spotlight in a way which had never happened before. That
was a huge deal when it came out, because I was born in that year, and obviously I've seen that movie, but to understand the cultural importance of it it's different living through it than of me just watching, saying, that I know those actors acting in that way, and some of them still live in New Orleans, and I know the Neville brothers and who they are, but to hear it, hearing it come from you, it's interesting.
Well, it was huge. You can't underestimate it. I mean, it created opportunities for musicians around the world, and at the same time, there was the big fad for blackened redfish with Chef Paul Prudhomme, and those both hit at the same time. Even though if you go out to Lafayette and go to someone's house, you're very unlikely to get served anything blackened. It's it was his creation, and it's good food, but it's not, but he sort of created a new tradition. And then there was I would guess you say, a synergy with that and the Cajun music fad. So Rockin' Doopsie cut a Zydeco commercial for Burger King, things like that. And
it was in the zeitgeist of the people.
That whole fad has come and gone, but it's raised a certain level of consistency, elevated a level of consistency where people playing Cajun music, Zydeco, swamp pop, different styles of New Orleans music, including rhythm and blues, to have better opportunities, better paying gigs, playing literally all over the globe.
It allowed the doors to open, and
yes. And
the Louisiana musicians walked right through it.
Yes, no, it was huge. It was really huge.
Well, Ben, I want to thank you so much for coming and, being just a wealth of knowledge on an area that we haven't really touched on yet through, your various work as an author, folklorist, and a fantastic programmer over at Jazz Fest.
Well, thank you.